The Chicago Bears are well underway in their departure from Mayor Lori Lightfoot and the city of Chicago. Denouncing all of the mayor's upgrade proposals, the Bears pounced when the opportunity came to purchase the shuddering Arlington Heights racecourse and to free themselves from Chicago's grueling grip over the controversial Soldier Field. In this video, we'll discuss not only all the drama to this point, but also just how similar the events unfolding now are to the chaos that led up to the stadium's renovation in 2003, and discover why after 50 years of play, the Bears never quite warmed up to the iconic, yet tragic venue. This is the demise of Soldier Field, how Chicago lost the Bears. Fair warning, this video is meant to be more of a narrative to discuss the events leading up to where we are now. As we go throughout the video, we'll break down all the proposals that have come forward so far and just how likely they're going to meet reality. First, let's cover some background on the Bears' current venue and the pertinent events during their time there. As of 2023, the Bears play at Soldier Field. It is a historic venue that deserves more than just a segment, but for our purposes, that's all you really need to know. It is worth noting, however, that in 2024, the stadium will technically celebrate its 100th anniversary. I say technically because after the 2003 renovation, loyalists began debating how significant the stadium still was after being drastically altered. At the time the stadium was built, Chicago had two professional football franchises. However, the Cardinals played their home games at McCaskey Park, home of the Chicago White Sox, and the Bears played their home games at Wrigley Field, home of the Chicago Cubs. This was in the 1920s, and at that time, large football-only stadiums were very rare. In fact, one of the few venues constructed around that time was the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, whose sole purpose wasn't football at all, but to host track events for the 1932 Summer Olympic Games. The geopolitics at the time were also different than they are now. For instance, Chicago was the second largest city in the United States, and Los Angeles was the 10th. Chicago felt that having a stadium was a community asset that only the greatest cities could provide, and after construction of the Coliseum, a memorial to World War I veterans, Chicago felt it needed to do something similar. After 2 years of construction, Municipal Grant Park Stadium opened on October 9, 1924 with a capacity of 75,000 spectators and a final construction cost of $13 million, $12 million more than its California counterpart. At first, the stadium hosted high school and college football games, with the Cardinals and Bears only playing charity games there. During the 1925 Army-Navy game, the stadium was dedicated as a memorial to World War I veterans who had died in combat and was renamed Soldier Field. It was also at this time that seating was extended, raising capacity to 100,000 spectators. The Chicago Cardinals would play their final season in Chicago in 1959, using Soldier Field as their home venue. The Bears would remain at the popular Wrigley Field until the AFL-NFL merger, as after the leagues combined, teams were required to play at venues with a minimum capacity of 50,000 fans, which Wrigley Field fell short of. The Bears then attempted to build a stadium in Arlington Heights, but their proposal was rejected by the newly combined NFL. With no other option, the team moved into the near 50-year-old Soldier Field, winning their first game at the complex 17-15 over the Pittsburgh Steelers on September 9, 1971. Bears founder and owner George Halas wrote a letter to season ticket holders announcing their lack of excitement for moving to the venue, but obviously, no other plans worked out. Citing a lack of superior options, the Bears finally agreed to a 20-year lease in 1978, with the Chicago Park District agreeing to help the team renovate the facility to modern standards. Individual seats, a press box, and 60 suites were among the amenities added, as the stadium's final capacity rested just under 67,000 fans. In 1987, Soldier Field was designated by the Secretary of the Interior as a National Historic Landmark. While very significant, this status is largely symbolic and did not legally tie Chicago to preserving the stadium, only offering tax incentives to do so. Despite historical significance, the Bears are a free market enterprise in the business of being profitable and financially successful, not preserving historic landmarks. They wanted a new stadium that was comparable to the other NFL teams, not something half a century older than the next oldest stadium in the league. In 1989, the Bears proposed building an indoor stadium dubbed McDome that would resemble the Stadium Convention Center combination in Indianapolis and proposed project in Atlanta, but the Illinois state legislature refused to fund the project. Experts cite this decision as a critical loss for Chicago, as the city likely could have held multiple Super Bowls among other sought-after events had this project met fruition. After this defeat, Bears president Michael McCaskey threatened relocation and purchased land options on sites in Hoffman Estates, Elk Grove Village, and Aurora. In 1995, McCaskey announced that he had reached a deal with developers in Northwest Indiana to construct an entertainment complex called Planet Park, but ultimately the Lake County Council, who has final say over developments in Indiana's most northwest county, said no thanks. Meanwhile, Chicago Mayor Richard Daley was constantly proposing Soldier Field renovations, including new video boards, more suites, restaurants, and eventually a retractable roof, with each attempt increasing the amount of money the city would commit to the project. McCaskey was impressed with many of the proposals that Daley brought to the team, but was fully committed to the notion that renovating Soldier Field was not the answer to the Bears Stadium woes, and spent 13 years set on that philosophy. In 1998, he put forth what would be his last new stadium proposal, a 68,000-seat stadium on 69 acres north of Elk Grove Village, and the majority of the citizens in the community were outraged. Community meetings were nothing but negative, and when officials planned to place their proposal on the ballot for referendum, the Bears simply bowed out. On top of the decade-and-a-half stadium debate, the latter part of the 90s was disastrous for the Bears on the field, resulting in a coaching change in addition to a big front office shakeup. Owner Virginia McCaskey announced that she would be replacing her son as president with the team's VP, Ted Phillips, who was the first person outside of the family to run the Bears franchise. To end the drama, Phillips signed a 5-year lease extension at Soldier Field, and contrary to the talk from the previous 15 years, stated that the Bears should always play within city limits. While Phillips' optimism was quite refreshing, the drama had only been removed from public display, and talks between the city and the team had continued behind closed doors. Rumors instantly emerged that the city would raise Soldier Field and build a new stadium in its place, but given its historical significance, many found this as an unsettling solution. On November 22, 2000, the city of Chicago and the Chicago Bears formally unveiled their plan for what would be a new stadium within the Soldier Field footprint. The proposal was estimated to cost $587 million for a modern 62,000-seat stadium with only the original colonnade facade left standing. At last, the Bears would have a modern venue with revenue-generating amenities, and more than that, a new lease awarded them the majority of the revenue that would be generated at the new stadium, which was the first time the Bears would have that arrangement in their 80-year history. However, the Chicago Park District would still have full control over Soldier Field. Given the historical significance and historic landmark status, pushback and criticism were immense, and many lawsuits ensued to stop the project. None, however, were able to prevent the transformation of Soldier Field from moving forward. The Bears had a turnaround year that fall and advanced to the divisional round of the playoffs, but the Eagles had their number that weekend, and immediately following the game, construction commenced. Only 36 hours had passed since the final snap when crews had nearly 24,000 of the stadium's seats removed, while fires still burned in the tailgating lots. By the time the project was finished, not a single soul was satisfied with the results. The stadium was still one of the smallest in the NFL, a historic icon was defaced, the final design was hideous, and the decade-and-a-half political process to bring this project to fruition frustrated everyone involved and mentally drained the public. Defamatory nicknames were shouted out left and right, and perhaps the most damning result of this entire process was that a federal advisory committee voted to strip the venue of its landmark status. One committee member saying, quote, "If we had let this stand, I believe it would have lowered the standard of the National Historic Landmarks throughout the country. We really had no other recourse." Fast forward to the 2-decade anniversary of the transformation, and the Bears had already taken steps to pivot off their unsatisfactory venue and well-regarded mistake. Before we go all in on the events of the last 2 years, let's break down the reasons why the renovation was considered a failure and the major reasons the Bears are trying to leave before the project even turns 20 years old. First, while at the time it wasn't the smallest stadium in the NFL, it quickly became the smallest venue with a before renovation capacity of around 67,000 and only about 61,500 after. Only the RCA Dome in Indianapolis was smaller, and the Colts upgraded to the 70,000-seat Lucas Oil Stadium in 2008. Today, Soldier Field has 2,000 fewer seats than the next smallest stadium, which is State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona. The low capacity decreases potential revenue for the team, as Bear games are frequent sellouts despite lackluster play. Experts estimate that the team could justify having a stadium with a capacity as high as 80,000. However, an enclosed stadium would likely be required to sell out consistently. In addition to size, Soldier Field has some other logistical issues predating renovation that would be hard to fix. To start, there's a limited number of gates fans can enter and exit, creating a bottleneck before and after games. There's also concerns over access. Being located near downtown Chicago off Lakeshore Drive, traffic is a mess, and the stadium's only parking lots are on the east and the south side of the stadium. The nearest transit stop is also a mile from the stadium, forcing fans who use public transit to walk 30 minutes through a maze around the Field Museum campus to get to their seat. Second to the stadium itself, the lease the Bears have with the Chicago Park District also puts a significant damper on team revenue, in addition to the Park District having control over the complex. This is a double-edged sword in the sense that the city of Chicago would likely be on the hook for paying for renovations to Soldier Field, but they also collect more revenue from the stadium than other municipalities do. This also includes revenue from parking lots on the campus. While we don't know how exactly the profits are split, Forbes estimated that in 2018, the team made about $166 million from Soldier Field alone that year, with the two lowest at the time being the Raiders and the Chargers, and we know how that turned out. One more note about the lease. Unlike almost every other venue in the NFL, Soldier Field receives no revenue from a naming rights deal, which could bring in about $15 to $25 million a year. And obviously, renaming a stadium labeled as a monument to fallen soldiers wouldn't be popular. Somewhat of a minor issue, but still noted as a frustration with Soldier Field, is the grass. The Chicago Park District maintains the playing surface, not the team or a stadium-specific entity. The grass has been known for not being maintained very well, leading to Andy Reid and the NFL Players Association to call out the NFL for allowing such poor playing conditions when the field was barely playable for a Bears-Chiefs preseason game in 2022. The last thing I'll mention here is that feedback on the look created by the renovation is still very mixed. I don't think anyone would say they love how the original facade and the glass bowl structure interact with each other, but despite many calling it an eyesore, not everyone hates it either. My takeaway is that the results produced by the renovation would probably lead someone to never try this idea ever again. So hopefully now you can see that there's a combination of reasons why Soldier Field is highly undesirable, and why renovating it or just simply putting a roof over it wouldn't solve all the problems the team has with it. As a result, the Bears began exploring their options, initially talking with the mayor's office and the Chicago Park District about another potential renovation to Soldier Field, but then a bombshell emerged. Arlington International Racecourse, better known as Arlington Park, had sort of been in a limbo state since 2019 and the passage of the Illinois Gaming Act, which allowed sports betting, but more pertinently, it allowed for construction of new casinos in Illinois. Horse racing had been one of Chicago's most popular sports in the 19th and 20th centuries, with the city at one point having the most major horse racing tracks in the nation at 6 different sites. Arlington opened in 1927 and went through several owners over the next 70 years. It was most well known for events like the Arlington Million and the Breeders' Cup World Thoroughbred Championships. In the late 90s, the park didn't host any events due to contract disputes and eventually was purchased by Churchill Downs Incorporated in 2000. Fast forward to 2019 when the Illinois Gaming Act was passed into law. Churchill Downs had acquired a majority stake in Rivers Casino in nearby Des Plaines and decided to use gambling expansions allowed by the new law there instead of Arlington Park. So, in February 2021, Churchill Downs announced they were planning to sell the entire park, advertising it as a great opportunity for redevelopment. This caught the Bears' attention immediately as it presented an unforeseen opportunity to flee the unsatisfactory Soldier Field and the grueling grip Chicago had over their venue, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Bears would be able to construct their own development free of the city of Chicago's influence and control. The team quickly developed a plan and ran all the numbers to confirm building a stadium and subsequent development in Arlington Heights made sense, and in June 2021, they submitted a bid to purchase the entire 326-acre property. Later that month, the village of Arlington Heights formally approved zoning changes for a large-scale football stadium, and the team shifted their entire focus to building a new stadium in Arlington Park, sounding alarms in the Chicago mayor's office. Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot first addressed the issue in May 2021 after rumors surfaced about the Bears' interest in the property, stating, "I've seen a couple of reports, but a couple of data points that I think you should be aware of are the Bears have a lease with Soldier Field until 2033, and the NFL doesn't let any teams break their leases. The Bears could technically break their lease early, but would face an $80 million penalty as a result, really just a drop in the bucket for a new NFL stadium." It was very fitting that this was also the same press conference where she announced that her office was finally going to start lifting COVID restrictions, albeit only slightly. 1 month later, she released a statement addressing the rumors again, calling the Bears' move noise and a negotiating tactic, further patronizing the team by saying that the organization should focus on putting a winning team on the field after finally becoming relevant for the first time in a while. In February 2022, Lightfoot assigned a task force whose focus was intended for the broader Field Museum campus, but their main task was well understood by the media: don't let the Bears leave Soldier Field. A first batch of proposals for upgrades to Soldier Field came in July and were rather indirect. Lightfoot released renderings on her Twitter account that showed a reimagined Field Museum campus that attempted to solve many of the problems with walking to Soldier Field from the nearest transit station, in addition to a new plaza outside the stadium. The Bears released a statement after the tweet stating, "The only potential project the Chicago Bears are exploring for a new stadium development is Arlington Park," putting a dagger in Lightfoot's now seemingly one-sided efforts to keep the team downtown. Later that same month, Lightfoot presented her first proposal to redevelop Soldier Field in a presentation to business owners and other city leaders. The proposal suggested constructing 4 columns to support a roof over the existing Arena Bowl, with the addition of bars and social spaces as part of the project. Lightfoot stated that the estimated cost would be based on whoever the stadium's anchor tenant is, be it an NFL or soccer team, but experts suggested enclosing Soldier Field would cost over $2 billion. This came after the Museum Campus Task Force shared their report detailing transit and layout improvements, in addition to stating it would be absolutely necessary to pursue a naming rights deal to support redevelopment. The Bears released their prior statement about being solely committed to Arlington Park, saying further that due to the purchase agreement with Churchill Downs, they were not allowed to pursue any other projects, alluding that calls from the mayor's office had likely been headed straight to voicemail for over a year at this point. In September, the Bears, in conjunction with Hart Howerton Architects, released several renderings that showed the mixed-use district the team wanted to build in addition to the new stadium. A site plan was also released that showed the full scale of the project with retention ponds, street layouts, where the new stadium would be located, and how much parking there would be. Several renderings showed a translucent cylinder on the spot where the new stadium would be, offering no insight as to what it would look like. Meanwhile, residents of Arlington Heights grew concerned of the village potentially paying for part of the new stadium and submitted petitions to the board that objected to any public money going towards the project. In November 2022, the Bears released an open letter on their website once again showing the renderings they had assembled, but also clarified some logistical matters, stating that they would not be pursuing any public money for the stadium itself, but wanted to partner with various governmental bodies to fund the mixed-use district development. In their letter, they also committed to building a venue that could be used 365 days a year, fully honoring their lease at Soldier Field, and that the economic impact of their project would top $9.4 billion, and went as far as breaking down the tax revenue by district, saying that Arlington Heights would benefit from $16 million in property tax revenue, Cook County $9.8 million, and $51.3 million for the state of Illinois. On January 8, 2023, the same day that the Bears wrapped up the worst NFL season of all 32 teams, Landmark Development released a low-budget video that further displayed redevelopment plans for Soldier Field. The video showed the enclosed stadium design that had already been released, a new transit hub, and entertainment development, among a much more detailed depiction of how social spaces and concourses would look in a renovated Soldier Field. I'm actually quite impressed by how well thought out the design was from an amenity perspective, considering that the city of Chicago did this without any input from an NFL team. But I think when you look at all the frustrations the Bears have with Soldier Field, one of the most significant being lack of control, I'm just not sure it's enough. The Bears stated in their November open letter that the purchase and sale agreement with Churchill Downs is subject to certain conditions being met, and we don't know what exactly those conditions are. So, while we wait for the sale to close on sometime in 2023, there's a possibility that it could fall through despite all the effort that's been put in so far. Given how the process went in the 1990s, I wouldn't be surprised if things didn't work out like everyone hoped, but I do think the sale falling through was unlikely. It is really important that the city of Chicago has done everything they've done so far, just in case the Bears' plans do indeed not work out. And one of the things I'm really curious to see is what the renderings for the Bears' proposed stadium look like. Remember, they plan to pay for it themselves, and all the Halas-McCaskey family money comes entirely from the Bears franchise, so we might be in for a budget-type venue instead of a state-of-the-art one. And if fans lean towards the city's plans over what the Bears propose, I really have no idea what would happen next. This is where I really need fan input to help me better understand what public sentiment is around the drama that's currently unfolding. What do you dislike the most about Soldier Field? Would you be more likely to go to a game in Arlington Heights? What about the history of Soldier Field? Is there anything left to save at this point? What do you think about the city's proposal to reimagine the stadium and the Field Museum campus? All excellent questions I would like your feedback on. One more thing I'd like to mention is that Bears president Ted Phillips, who led the Bears front of the Soldier Field renovation disaster in 2002, announced he was retiring after the 2022 NFL season. In January 2023, it was announced that Kevin Warren, the commissioner of the Big Ten Conference, would be the team's new CEO, becoming only the second individual to Phillips outside of the Halas-McCaskey family to lead the team. This may actually be quite strategic in terms of building relationships that may help the team bring events like the Big Ten Championship, the Big Ten Tournament, and hopefully other college sporting events to their new stadium. Definitely a storyline to follow going forward. While Soldier Field does have specific issues that need to be addressed, I really think the Bears' biggest issue is lack of control over the stadium and its revenue streams. I mean, who doesn't want more control and more money, right? If I had to take a guess at what happens next, the Bears will release renderings of their proposed stadium at some point in 2023. Hopefully when they do so, they will release a timeline of construction and when it might open. And I can almost promise you the team will break their lease at Soldier Field before it ends in 2033. Since the team can control the stadium project on their own schedule, I think the bigger hurdle is working out the details for the mixed-use development. And remember, the sale of the racetrack to the team hasn't even happened yet. Looking at some other examples, SDCCU Stadium in San Diego was demolished in 2021 to make room for a new stadium for San Diego State and mixed development. Fast forward 2 years later, and while the stadium is complete, groundbreaking has yet to take place on the mixed-use development. SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, however, which was built using private money, built the stadium and the mixed-use space at the same time, with the stadium completed first. I would imagine that, assuming the sale closes, fans prefer the Bears' proposed plans over the Soldier Field redevelopment, the team secures financing to construct the mixed-use district, and there's no recession for the next several years. We're probably looking at a new stadium opening in 2028 or 2029, unless developments move quickly this upcoming year. For now, we're just going to have to wait and see what happens over the course of 2023, and we here at Labrise TV will be watching closely.